I remember distinctly the day that I was driving around. I even remember the color of the apartments. They were like a light, kind of in between purple and blue. And as I was driving, and I had a big white truck because at the time I was driving for a company, a third party company that delivered Amazon packages. So, yes, I was once upon a time an Amazon delivery guy. In the process of doing that, I remember that day thinking to myself, where did my life go? And young, I mean, I'm not saying that all of a sudden I thought I was, you know, way along in life, but rather the events that had happened in my life that brought me to this place of working at Amazon, it was just kind of that sense of like, how did I get here? And the hard thing about that conversation, mind you, I'm by myself inside of this van, making these deliveries, occasionally saying hi to a person here and there. But there was a lot of alone time, a lot of time for me to be with my own thoughts, a lot of time to, kind of disappear into my own bubble. In that process, I knew the answer to that question. How did I get here? And the only answer at the moment now, obviously, with time, spending time with Jesus, having Jesus talk to me about how my life has gone and the ins, outs, ups and downs. But at that time, I only had one answer, and that is, I am here because of me, because of my choices, because of my own logic, my own reasoning, my own whatever the case is. I really didn't have any other, like, well, maybe, at the time. No, it was just, I'm here because of me. And what's funny is I remember in tears thinking to myself, this is it. Like I was, I didn't see myself as ever returning to ministry or to being able to share the gospel with anyone, or in the capacity that I used to. Which is why right now, this right here in front of you, the person that is talking to you, is here because of grace. Which is why, as this is literally the first week of Advent, as we're entering into this season, that we prepare ourselves for the arrival of the Messiah, the arrival and birth of the one true King, the one who we've been, awaiting for. The reason why we celebrate Christmas, if you will. That all being said, I remember thinking to myself in that van, I don't think it's going to get better. I don't, and I'm being honest with you guys. It was a very depressing and very dark time in my life, and I kept thinking to myself, I'm the one that's ruined this, and I'm also the one that's going to live in this reality. Nothing is going to change. And I remember one day, and whether I shared this before or not, I remember one day there was one guy that was part of the huge, almost 40-person Amazon team that was our company, and he wasn't kind, and he was very, very large and very tall, and he was very boisterous, meaning that he would cuss you out, and everyone in that entire facility would know that he cussed you out. He was not a very happy camper, and everyone was scared of him. And one day he started asking questions to our boss very aggressively, and our boss kind of tuned him out because he knew this guy's always upset. And so I remember I walked up to him, and just because of the nature of my heart and the formation that Jesus gave me, I walked up and I said, hey, I have an answer to your question. If you will just, kind of let me show you on my phone, and then you can do it on your own. And I remember, I mean, he taller than me, and he just looked down at me and he was like, "What's your deal? Why are you helping me? Are you part of this company? And we as other employees don't know that you're someone special." And I was like, "No, no, I'm no one special at all. I'm just trying to be helpful." And in that moment, again, this guy, very upset, very mean, he then looked at me and said, "What did you used to do before you worked here?" And it's one of those, I didn't want anyone to know. I didn't want to say. And so I looked at him and I said, I used to be a pastor at a church. But yeah. And his face got even angrier than it did before. And I thought, Here we go. Like he's probably going to get mad at me, yell at me, cuss me out like he does everyone else. No, in fact, his face stayed that same way and walked away. And I said, well, looks like I dodged a bullet. No sooner, probably 30 minutes later, that man yelling across the yard outside for everyone who works at this facility to hear, not just our company, but other companies, he yells out, "Hey, Reverend, I have another question." And everyone turned around to say, "Who the heck is Reverend?" And then he pointed me out and said, "You, I'm talking to you." And in that moment, I thought to myself, that's the last thing that I should ever be called again. And here I am today. Hope. Hope is a dangerous thing. And the reason why it's a dangerous thing is because where there is hope, that means there's always the chance of a future. There's always a chance that something will change, that the story, the narrative that you're living in is this isn't the end. This isn't how it ends. This isn't the pit or the hole that you will spend the rest of your life. And let me remind you, upon my confession, sometimes the pit and the hole that we find ourselves in is the result of our own doing. And sometimes it's not. Can I tell you a story? As we are walking into Advent, day one, week one, whatever you want to call it, Israel had a time where it had its kingdom divided. And Israel very much once upon a time looked greatly at its leader from the past. One incredible leader, particularly, that they just always thought about. It was one of those, the good old days. It was always this one guy that was the good old days, the good old times, the kingdom united, and that was King David. King David was the example of what a king priest should be, and even a foreshadow of a covenant, of a promise that God had made. God saying, "Hey, you'll always have somebody on David's throne. You'll always have, Israel will be united, and the people of God will be God's people, and so on and so forth." But the reality of what they were looking at, Israel, oh my goodness, Israel's kingdom is divided in two. The northern portion, or rather, sorry, the southern portion, Israel, and then we have Judah. Judah is now its own separate, still part of the same people, still part of, but it separated itself. And so there was Judah and then there was Israel. And they started to fight against each other. In the midst of that, we're looking at a timetable, more specifically during the time of Isaiah, which is the book you're going to go to. And as we look at Isaiah, during Isaiah's time, prophetically, he is not only leading Israel, but he's also calling Israel, hoping that they will listen. But here's what Israel does. Israel ends up thinking, okay, so we have this Assyrian army. It's not big yet, but it's a potential threat. So instead of, making Assyria their enemy, they decide if we make them our friends, then we can turn this whole thing around and combine our forces with them. And then we can fight against Judah, and Judah will be the one to fall. I mean, let them take the hit, not us. Mind you, the question, because we are reading scripture, is God, where are you in the midst of this? And the thing is, God was removed. God was put on the shelf. Why? Because Israel decided that the only way that they were going to politically survive, the only way that they were going to physically survive, is if they aligned themselves with Assyria, who was small at the time. But as history will play out, Assyria will end up capturing all of Israel, all of Judah, and then they're all taken into exile. Why? Because they chose one major flaw. Let's take God out of the picture. In other words, they found themselves in a situation of their own doing. Israel combined its forces. Why? Because they wanted to trust in that king. They wanted to trust in the manpower. They wanted to trust in nobles. They wanted to trust in somebody else's power because that was a little bit more tangible instead of trusting God, which God has always defended and fought for Israel and against its armies. Not Israel's armies, rather their enemies' armies. Judah simply says, I will trust God. So what ends up happening? Well, guess what? Assyria takes over. And Assyria does specifically attack Judah and destroys Judah and ends up starting to take Judah and the people of Judah back to the desert. But in the process, it also turned its back against Israel, and now Israel is being destroyed. This all happens, and Isaiah reminds the people of Israel in chapter 8, remember those days. Remember the days when you trusted in kings and you trusted in nobles and you trusted in somebody else to rescue you. Remember the days where you put God on the shelf and you ignored him. You didn't do anything that God commanded. You ignored his commands. You ignored his heart. You completely ignored him. And then you thought, if I just lean on the Assyrians, then I can attack Judah, and then I'm not the enemy. Judah's the enemy. Lo and behold, Judah was not only captured, but also was Israel. So now it's do you remember those days when you would walk out into the street and somebody would kill your relatives? Somebody would take one of your kids captive. Somebody would take you and your entire household. Do you remember? And so often than not, we do remember. Or maybe you're one of those who finds themselves in this dark time that you know, if you're going to be honest with yourself, probably your own fault. But there's also times when it's not, and it's just others. Others choosing to sin, others choosing to be wrong, others choosing to, their will be done and not yours. And so you are now affected by them. In the midst of darkness, to quote the title of a Star Wars movie, there arose a new hope. Can I read this to you? Because as we're entering the time of Advent and looking at why was this so important? Why was Advent, the arrival of the Messiah, in the way that the Messiah arrived, why was this so important? Because for Isaiah and because for God, there was something greater going on. See, God made a promise to David and to Israel that there would be one like David, but greater than David. And he promised that someday this child or descendant of David would in fact rule on David's throne for eternity. And his rulership would be incredible. That is where our story lands. So I want you to turn to Isaiah. Here we are, hundreds of years before Jesus' arrival, that we are looking and reflecting on what did God say to his prophet that was warning Israel and warning Judah and warning everyone about, seriously, in the middle of the greatest of darkness, there is one spark of hope. Isaiah chapter 9. Nevertheless, the gloom of the distressed land will not be like that of the former times, when he humbled the land of Zebulun and the land of Naphtali. But in the future, he will bring honor to the way of the sea, to the land of the Jordan, to Galilee of the nations. Now we pause there and go, man, that sounds familiar. It does. But why specifically does it say, to the way of the sea, by the Jordan, near Galilee? Because here's the deal. This is the last place that God should or could do anything. Why? Because when Assyria attacked, Judah's in the northern part, above the Dead Sea, north of that. This is where Galilee is. This is where the Jordan is. This is where all of this was attacked by the Assyrians. And the Assyrians ended up implementing their culture, implementing their gods, implementing their people. And because this was an attack upon the nation, guess what? They took the women, they took the children, they took the people, and they end up intermarrying. They end up making them slaves. They end up being abusive. You get the picture. What ends up happening is that this area, known as the Galilee, and by the way, Galilee was often associated with Gentiles. In other words, where would you expect any spark of hope to happen? I'll tell you where you don't. Not in the area of Galilee, not north. Why? Because there's so much pagan culture that has infected and changed that area. But give it to God. Watch God pick the worst place, the darkest place, the most infected place, the most terrible, the last place you would ever expect God to leave a spark of hope. That's where he starts. Now, a poem, a song begins a psalm, if you will, that Isaiah begins to pronounce to the people saying, listen, it was bad back in those days, wasn't it? But as he's moving forward in history, he goes, listen, we're going to shoot to the future. The people walking in darkness have seen a great light. A light has dawned on those living in the land of darkness. Notice what I shared with you before, the region that he's talking about. You have enlarged the nation and increased its joy. The people have rejoiced because of you as they rejoice in a harvest time. So what is Isaiah getting at? He goes, listen, there's going to come a day when those in darkness are going to see a light. This light is not specified. Why? Because it's an allusion to Genesis 1 and 2. The light is God himself. God is going to show up to be the light again. Where? In the darkest of areas. In the worst. I am convinced the more and more that I read scripture that God is the one that I have come to call the God of dirty hands. Man, he loves messing around in the yuck. Here we have a promise. There's going to come a day when you are going to see light in the darkest of places, and he will in fact bring joy to that nation, a joy that this nation, Israel and Judah, do not have right now. But they're saying someday you will have joy, the kind of joy that, for example, you walk into the fields and there is so much food. Now, for you foodies who are watching right now, you get what I'm saying. Have you ever walked into like a buffet and you're like, I don't even know where to begin? The blessings that they would have understood when they said, just like when you are walking before a harvest, what kind of joy do you have there? The kind of joy that says we don't need anything. We've got all that we need. We're going to be living like kings. We're going to be taken care of. Another example is, and they will rejoice when dividing spoils. What would happen is that there would be a holy war. And at the end of the holy war, those who won would bring back all the treasures, the food, the everything that you could think of, that they conquered the people. They took all of their stuff and brought it back. And so Israel was like, man, do you remember those days when we would have all these plunder and blessings, the treasures that we would have? And we would just sit there going, yeah, we won, we're free, and we get all their stuff. That is what Isaiah is getting at. You know that joy that you had once? It's going to be like that, but 100 times greater. For you have shattered their oppressive yoke, the rod on their shoulders, the staff of their oppressors, just as you did on the day of Midian. It was Assyria who loved to put rods on people's necks and control them and treat them like cattle. So for Isaiah to say this, they're looking at this going, are you serious? Are you really telling us that God is saying that someday we will lose the oppression of our enemies? Yes, but it's not just Assyria, folks. You see, you are getting ahead of the sermon, aren't you? You're looking at this going, doesn't this in fact reflect a greater narrative? Yes. Yes, it does. For every trampling boot of battle and the bloodied garments of war will be burned as fuel for the fire. For a child. Read this with me carefully. Grab your Bible and read this carefully. For a child will be born for us, a son will be given to us. And who's us? Israel? No. Do you remember where the light will show up? Where? Judah. Judah's tribe. Judah's area. This is where the promised son, descendant of David, is going to show up. For a child will be born to us, a son will be given to us, and the government will be on his shoulders. He will be named Wonderful Counselor, Mighty God, Eternal Father, Prince of Peace. Why is this significant? One, it's a son. It's a son of David, but it's not David's son. It's a lineage of David. And in that lineage, we find out that this son has a very unique responsibility, meaning the governance of the world falls upon his shoulders. We've never heard of any king to do that. Especially at this time that Isaiah is prophetically speaking this, they're going, are you talking about Ahaz? No, for sure not, because Ahaz ruined everything. And even the descendants after that, they still ruin things. They're not like the guy that's being described here. This son will have a name. He will be named Wonderful Counselor. By the way, these are pairs of words. They're paired together because they have a significance in revealing who this is. Wonderful Counselor, we think, oh, that's really pretty. Like he's going to be one of those, like, giving us advice. No. Wonderful means miraculous. The acts of God, miracles. Counselor means wisdom. Are you telling me that this future king will do miracles, but they will be backed by the wisdom of God? Yes. I told you it gets better. The second pair of names, Eternal Father. I'm sorry, no. I got ahead of myself. Mighty God. Did you know that the name Ezekiel is the same word as mighty God? Yeah. Ezekiel's name means God is mighty, or is my power, is my shield. This soon to be here son was not only going to be called the miracle worker with God's wisdom, but he was also going to be the power to rescue his people. He will be their knife and their shield. Sword, rather, not knife. He will be what they need. And then, Eternal Father, is that his name? Yes, but not in the sense that you're thinking. You're like, okay, now we have a theological issue. Is he the Son? Is he the Father? No. The two words, Eternal Father, is a description of one another. It is a Father that is eternal. What it's referring to is, unlike this idea, which, by the way, the culture that they're living in the northern part would be so riddled with pagan ideas that they also had pseudo-gods and gods of gods, right? So in other words, it is not fully a god, it is a demigod. This was Isaiah and God's way of saying, this is not me giving birth to a demigod. No. He said he will have the title of Eternal Father, meaning I am the one that rules this household. He's in charge. He has wisdom. He is the greatest of all, to be in charge of all things. Thus, a father who lives forever. Because a father would be in charge of the house. He is the Prince of Peace. Every king wants peace. That's what every king is famous for. But this peace it's Shad Shalom. A peace that he is going to bring, but it is not just the absence of war, but rather the absence of an enemy. Come on, folks. This can preach itself. The absence of an enemy? The dominion will be vast, and its prosperity will never end. He will reign on the throne of David and over his kingdom, to establish and sustain it with justice and righteousness. How will he rule? With justice and righteousness. Everything he does and how he reigns will be right, in the presence and power of God. From now on and forever, the zeal of the Lord's armies will what? Accomplish. One of the greatest lessons that God has been teaching me this year. A lesson that I knew in my head, but I didn't know in my heart until this moment. There are battles that I have no idea how to win. And it is okay for me to acknowledge and say, God, this struggle, this battle, I need you to fight for me. I need you to fight next to me. I need you to fight with me. I need you to fight for me, because I can't. I don't know how. Isaiah wanted Judah and Israel to know this promised Messiah, this promised Son that will be born in the line of David, that will reign forever and evermore. God will do all of this. You don't have anything to worry about. So, ladies and gentlemen, if I could give you one word of advice in the midst of this first day of Advent, as we reflect upon the struggles of Isaiah, and they look to the future and they realize this story, this darkness isn't forever. This darkness doesn't stay. There is light, there is hope, there is a future, there is more to this story. There is more to your story. Your story doesn't end because you ruined it. No, you hand it to the one who is the author, the one who has the pen, the one who can rewrite things, and he will show you his glory to show you once more. Because of my son that is coming to rule and reign, you will be set free. You will feel shalom, freedom, where there is no enemy. He has come to rescue us greater than any rescue you've ever felt in your life, because it is the rescue of your soul, making you whole, making you once more a child full of God's presence. This is why, one of many reasons, Jesus shows up. Because our story needs light, even in its darkest places. If I could leave you with one thing and only one thing that you learn from today, is that last verse. And the Lord of heaven's armies will do this. God will do this. Grace and peace be with you. I'm excited to go through Advent with you. This is the way.